The pie smelled like ambition and disaster, and Eliza Garrison held it in her trembling hands like a confession she could not take back. She stood on the porch of the neighboring farmhouse, her boots scuffed from the long walk across the Kansas fields that stretched between their properties. The September sun beat down on her shoulders, and sweat trickled down her spine beneath her faded calico dress. The pie tin was hot even through the cloth she had wrapped around it, and she could see where the crust had blackened along the edges, bubbling up in places where the filling had boiled over and burned against the sides. The door swung open before she could lose her nerve and run. Isaac Shaw stood there in his shirt sleeves, suspenders hanging loose at his sides, his dark hair disheveled as though he had been running his hands through it. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, with weathered skin that spoke of long days under the prairie sun. His eyes were a clear gray, the color of rain clouds moving across the plains, and they focused on her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the floorboards. "Miss Garrison," he said, his voice warm with surprise, "did not expect to see you today." "I made you a pie," she said, and her voice shook so badly the words nearly broke apart. She thrust it toward him, the tin wobbling in her hands. "I know it is burnt. I am sorry. The stove runs hot, and I was not watching carefully enough, and the crust is all wrong, and I should not have even brought it. But I already walked all the way here, and I wanted to thank you for helping repair our fence last week. And hold on now," Isaac said gently, reaching out to take the pie from her hands before she dropped it. His fingers brushed hers, calloused and warm, and she jerked back as though scalded. He looked down at the pie, at the blackened edges and the uneven crust, and something softened in his expression. "This looks just fine." "It does not," Eliza said miserably. "It looks terrible." "You do not have to eat it. I can take it back." "Not a chance." Isaac stepped back from the door, gesturing her inside. "Come in out of that sun. And I am going to eat this pie right now, every last bite, because it has been a long morning and I have been hungry since dawn." Eliza hesitated on the threshold, twisting her hands in her skirt. "You really do not have to." "I know I do not have to," Isaac said, already moving toward his small kitchen table. "I want to. Now come inside before you get heatstroke standing there arguing with me." She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. The house was simple but tidy, with whitewashed walls and plain furniture that Isaac had built himself. The kitchen occupied one corner, with a cast-iron stove and a dry sink, and morning light streamed through the single window. He set the pie on the table and fetched a knife and fork from a drawer, then cut himself a generous slice while Eliza stood frozen near the door. He lifted the first bite to his mouth, and she held her breath. The crust was burnt. She knew it was burnt. The filling would be too sweet or not sweet enough, and the apples would be mushy because she had cooked them too long. And he would taste it, and his face would do that thing faces always did. That slight tightening around the eyes and mouth that meant disappointment even when people tried to hide it. Isaac chewed slowly, thoughtfully, then he swallowed and took another bite. "This is good," he said. "You are lying." "I am not." He looked up at her, and there was nothing but sincerity in those gray eyes. "The apples are sweet and the spices are just right. You put cinnamon in here and something else." "Nutmeg, a little," Eliza admitted, her voice small. "But the crust is a little dark on the edges, sure," Isaac said, taking another bite. "But it tastes like butter and effort, and I can tell you worked hard on this. That matters more than a few burnt spots." He paused, looking at her carefully. "When is the last time you ate today?" "I had breakfast." "That is not what I asked." Eliza felt her cheeks flush. "I had coffee." "That is not breakfast." Isaac stood and fetched another plate and fork, cutting a second slice of pie and setting it in front of the chair across from him. "Sit down and eat your own cooking." It deserves to be enjoyed, not worried over. She sat because standing felt impossible suddenly, and because something in his voice made her unable to refuse. She picked up the fork and took a small bite of the pie, tasting burnt crust and cinnamon-sweet apples and her own failure. "It is awful," she whispered. "It is not," Isaac said firmly, demolishing his slice with obvious appetite. "It is a pie made by someone who is still learning, and that is nothing to be ashamed of. How long have you been baking on your own? Since Mama died 2 years ago." The words came out flat and hard. "She tried to teach me, but I was never any good at it. My father says I waste more flour and sugar than I use properly, and my brothers say eating my cooking is like taking your life in your hands." Isaac's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "Your father and brothers are fools then, begging your pardon for saying so." Eliza looked up sharply, shocked by the bluntness of the statement. "I mean it," Isaac continued, cutting himself another slice of pie. "Any man who cannot see the effort and care that went into this is too stupid to deserve it. You walked all the way over here in the heat to bring me something you made with your own hands, and it tastes just fine. Better than fine. It tastes like someone cared enough to try." Something tight and painful lodged in Eliza's throat. She looked down at her plate, at the crumbling crust and the soft apple filling, and felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "You do not have to be kind," she said. "I am not being kind," Isaac said. "I am being honest. There is a difference." He finished his second slice and regarded the pie with satisfaction. "In fact, I think I will have another piece." "You cannot possibly want more." "I absolutely do." He cut a third slice, this one even larger than the others, and settled back in his chair with the air of a man preparing to enjoy a feast. "Tell me something. Why did you decide to bring me a pie?" Eliza twisted her fork in her fingers. "You helped repair our fence last week." "My father asked you, and you came over and spent half a day fixing the posts that had rotted through. We should have paid you, but father said money is tight right now, so I thought I could at least make you something to say thank you." "Your father was right to ask," Isaac said. "And I did not want payment. We are neighbors. That is what neighbors do. Still, I wanted to thank you properly." "You did." Isaac held her gaze across the table. "You made me a pie and brought it over in the heat of the day, and I am sitting here eating it and enjoying every bite." "That is a proper thank you, Miss Garrison." She felt something shift in her chest, some small knot of tension loosening. "You can call me Eliza," she said quietly, "if you want to." "Eliza." Isaac said her name like he was tasting it, rolling it around in his mouth to test the flavor. "That is a good name, and you can call me Isaac, seeing as we are neighbors and pie-sharing acquaintances now." She almost smiled at that. Almost. He finished his third slice and sat back with a satisfied sigh, patting his stomach. "That hit the spot perfectly. I have been working since sun-up and had nothing but coffee and some cold cornbread. This was exactly what I needed. You are going to make yourself sick eating that much burnt pie." "It is not burnt, it is golden," Isaac said with exaggerated seriousness. "Darkly golden, boldly golden, adventurously golden." This time Eliza did smile just a little, and Isaac's whole face lit up when he saw it. "There," he said softly. "That is better." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the Kansas wind rattling the window panes and the late morning sun climbing higher in the sky. Eliza finished her own small slice, and though she could still taste the bitterness of the burnt crust, it somehow seemed less terrible now. "I should go," she said finally, standing and smoothing her skirt. "My father will wonder where I went." "Take the rest of the pie with you," Isaac said. "What? No, I brought it for you." "And I ate half of it already," Isaac said, standing and wrapping the cloth back around the tin. "Take it home. Share it with your family. Maybe they will surprise you." Eliza doubted that very much, but she took the pie tin from his hands, careful not to let their fingers touch this time. "Thank you," she said, "for eating it, for saying kind things about it." "I said honest things," Isaac corrected, "but you are welcome." He walked her to the door and held it open, leaning against the frame as she stepped back out into the bright Kansas day. "Eliza," she turned back, shading her eyes against the sun. "If you ever want to practice your baking again, I am always here and always hungry," he said. "Just so you know." Her cheeks burned, but not entirely from embarrassment. "I will remember that." She walked home across the fields with the pie tin in her hands and something warm and unfamiliar glowing in her chest. Behind her, Isaac stood on his porch and watched her go until she was just a small figure in a calico dress disappearing into the golden waves of prairie grass. The next week, Eliza baked bread. She had been making bread since she was 12 years old, and she was marginally better at it than she was at pies, but that did not mean it was good. The loaves always came out dense and heavy, better suited for throwing at coyotes than eating, and the crust was invariably either too hard or too soft. Never that perfect golden brown color her mother had achieved so effortlessly. Still, she found herself mixing dough on a Thursday morning, kneading it with more force than was probably necessary, and thinking about gray eyes and a kind voice saying, "It tastes like someone cared enough to try." Her father and brothers were out working the fields, which meant she had the house to herself. The small farmhouse was quiet except for the creak of floorboards beneath her feet and the rhythmic thump of dough against the wooden table. She shaped the loaves and set them to rise, then paced the kitchen while she waited, rehearsing what she would say if she walked over to Isaac's place again. The bread came out dense, as always, but at least it was not burnt this time. She wrapped one loaf in a clean cloth and set out across the fields before she could talk herself out of it. It was cooler today, with clouds scudding across the September sky and the wind carrying hints of the autumn to come. The walk to Isaac's farm took 20 minutes, and she spent every one of them telling herself this was foolish, that he had just been being polite, that he would eventually tire of her appearing on his doorstep with substandard baked goods. But when she knocked on his door and he opened it, his face broke into a grin that made her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Eliza," he said, clearly pleased, "this is a nice surprise." "I made bread," she said, less shakily than the pie announcement but still with a tremor in her voice. "I thought you might want some. If you do not, that is fine. I can take it back. Now, why would I want you to do that?" Isaac took the loaf from her hands and unwrapped it, examining it with the same serious attention he had given the pie. "This looks solid, heavy, good, and filling. It is dense as a brick. Perfect for a working man, then." He broke off a piece and bit into it, chewing thoughtfully. "Good flavor." "You use sourdough starter, a little. It helps the rise usually, though you could not tell from that loaf." "I can tell just fine," Isaac said. "This tastes like real bread, not that store-bought nonsense. Come in, I just made coffee." And just like that, she was inside his house again, sitting at his table again, watching him cut thick slices of her dense bread and slather them with butter from the crock he kept in his root cellar. He made her a cup of coffee, strong and black, and they sat together while he ate her bread and told her about his week. He talked easily, his voice a low rumble that filled the small kitchen. He told her about the Mustang he was trying to break, a spotted mare with a stubborn streak a mile wide. He told her about the barn roof that needed patching before winter and the fence line that needed to be extended if he was going to increase his herd next year. He asked her about her family's farm, about the crops they were bringing in, about whether her father needed help with the harvest. And somehow, without quite meaning to, Eliza found herself talking too. She told him about the vegetable garden she had planted behind the house, about the tomatoes that had come in so well and the squash that had been devoured by insects. She told him about the chickens that refused to lay in the nesting boxes and preferred to hide their eggs in the tall grass. She told him about the barn cat who had kittens and how she had to keep them secret because her father said they could not afford to feed any more mouths, even little feline ones. "How many kittens?" Isaac asked. "5. They are tiny and perfect, and I have been sneaking them scraps." "That is not a secret barn cat situation. That is a barn cat conspiracy," Isaac said seriously, and Eliza laughed, a real laugh that surprised her with its brightness. Isaac's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "You should do that more often." "Do what?" "Laugh. It suits you." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked down at her coffee cup. "There has not been much to laugh about lately." "Then we will have to fix that." Isaac finished his bread and leaned back in his chair, regarding her with that steady gray gaze. "You are welcome here any time, you know. You do not need to bring baked goods as an excuse, though I certainly will not complain if you do. I do not want to be a nuisance." "You are not a nuisance," Isaac said firmly. "You are a neighbor and a friend, and I enjoy your company. Besides, someone has to appreciate your cooking properly, and it clearly is not happening over at your father's place." The warmth in Eliza's chest expanded, pressing against her ribs. "You are very kind, Isaac." "I am very honest," he corrected, echoing his words from the week before. "There is a difference." She left an hour later when the sun was high and her father would be coming in for the midday meal. Isaac walked her to the door and told her to come back whenever she wanted, and she walked home with her empty cloth and the memory of his smile warming her better than any Kansas sun. September gave way to October, and Eliza found herself at Isaac's door more often than she probably should have. She brought him biscuits that were lumpy and uneven. He ate them with honey and told her they were flaky and light. She brought him a cake that had collapsed in the middle. He cut around the sunken part and praised the flavor of the icing. She brought him stew in a covered pot, convinced it was too salty, and he ate 2 bowls and told her the seasoning was perfect for a cold evening. And every time he invited her in. Every time he made her coffee or tea. Every time they talked. She learned that he had come to Kansas 3 years ago from Missouri, buying this land with money he had saved from years of ranch work in Texas and Oklahoma. She learned that he had a sister back in Missouri, married with children of her own, and that he wrote to her once a month. She learned that his parents had died when he was young, that he had been raised by an uncle who taught him everything he knew about horses and cattle and hard work. He learned, slowly, carefully, about her life too. He learned that her mother had died of pneumonia 2 winters ago, leaving Eliza alone to manage a household of men who did not notice or care how hard she worked. He learned that her father was a hard man, quick to criticize and slow to praise, and that her 2 brothers, Henry and James, followed his example. He learned that Eliza had never been good enough, pretty enough, useful enough in their eyes, and that every meal she cooked and every chore she completed was measured against her mother's ghost and found wanting. "They are wrong," Isaac said one evening in late October, when she had confessed her latest failure at the dinner table, a roast that had been too dry and potatoes that had been too bland. "They are wrong about you, Eliza." They were sitting on his porch in the cooling evening air, watching the sun set over the prairie in bands of orange and purple. She had brought him apple fritters, which had come out greasy and misshapen, and he had eaten them all and declared them delicious. "You do not know that," she said quietly. "You have not tasted most of my cooking. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am hopeless." "You are not hopeless." Isaac's voice was low and fierce. "You are learning. You are trying. That takes courage, especially when people keep telling you that you are failing. He turned to look at her, his profile sharp against the sunset. Do you know what I think when you show up at my door with something you have baked? That you are going to have to suffer through another terrible meal. No, he shook his head. I think that you are the bravest person I know. Eliza stared at him. Brave for baking, for trying, Isaac said. For getting up every morning and making something with your own hands, even though you know people are going to criticize it. For walking all the way over here and handing it to me, even though you are terrified I will not like it. For not giving up, even though it would be easier to just let your father and brothers fend for themselves. He paused, his voice softening. That is not nothing, Eliza, that is everything. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back hard. I am not brave, I am just stubborn. Stubbornness is courage that will not quit, Isaac said. And I like that about you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Isaac, she started, not knowing how to finish. He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and solid around hers. You are good enough, Eliza, just as you are, burnt pies and dense bread and all. Do not let anyone tell you different. She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was brushing gently across her knuckles, and felt something crack open inside her, something that had been locked up tight for so long she had forgotten it was there. Thank you, she whispered. They sat like that until full dark, hands linked, watching the stars emerge one by one over the Kansas prairie. November brought the first frost and the last of the harvest, and with it came a letter from Eliza's aunt and uncle in Missouri announcing their intention to visit. Her father was in a foul mood for days, snapping at everyone and complaining about the expense of hosting guests. Eliza scrubbed the house from top to bottom, aired out the spare room, and tried to prepare herself for the arrival of her Aunt Martha and Uncle George, who she remembered as being even more critical than her father, if such a thing were possible. They arrived on a cold Saturday afternoon, their wagon loaded with trunks and packages, and Aunt Martha descended like a bird of prey, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the farmhouse and finding it lacking. The place looks shabby, William, she said to Eliza's father by way of greeting. You need a new coat of paint, and those shutters are hanging crooked. Good to see you too, Martha, Eliza's father said dryly. Uncle George was a silent, heavy-set man who said little and frowned often. He shook hands with Eliza's father and brothers, nodded at Eliza, and went to unload the wagon without a word. Eliza prepared dinner that evening with shaking hands, knowing that everything she made would be dissected and judged. She roasted a chicken, made potatoes and gravy, baked biscuits, and put together a dried apple pie for dessert. It was the best she could manage, and she knew it would not be good enough. She was right. These biscuits are tough, Aunt Martha announced, setting one down on her plate with a thud. Did you forget the baking powder? No, madam, I used, and this gravy is lumpy. You need to strain it, girl. Did your mother teach you nothing? Eliza felt her face burn. I strained it twice, clearly not well enough. Aunt Martha turned to Eliza's father. William, you need to spend more time teaching this girl to cook properly. No man will want to marry her if she cannot even make a decent biscuit. I have told her the same thing 100 times, Eliza's father said, not looking at her. She does not listen. I do listen, Eliza said quietly, but no one paid attention. The meal continued in the same vein, with Aunt Martha picking apart every dish and Eliza's father and brothers nodding in agreement. Even the pie, which Eliza had worked on for hours, was declared too sweet and underbaked, though everyone ate their slices anyway. By the time the dishes were cleared, Eliza felt hollowed out and scraped raw. She escaped to the kitchen to wash up, standing over the basin with her hands submerged in hot water and her eyes burning with unshed tears. Through the doorway, she could hear Aunt Martha's voice carrying from the parlor, still cataloging all the ways the house and the farm and Eliza herself fell short of expectations. She did not hear the knock on the back door, but she saw the shadow cross the window and looked up to see Isaac standing outside. Her heart leaped and plummeted all at once. She dried her hands quickly and went to the door, opening it just enough to slip outside into the cold November darkness. "Isaac, what are you doing here?" "I saw your aunt and uncle arrive earlier," he said. "Thought I would come by and see how you were doing." "I am fine." "You are not fine." He studied her face in the dim light spilling from the kitchen window. "What happened?" "Nothing, just dinner with family." She tried to smile and failed. "Aunt Martha does not think much of my cooking." "Aunt Martha can go to hell then." Despite everything, Eliza almost laughed. "You should not say things like that." "Probably not," Isaac agreed, "but I mean it anyway." He hesitated, then said, "I brought you something." He held out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Eliza took it, confused, and unwrapped it to find a slightly crooked biscuit, golden brown and still faintly warm. "I made these tonight," Isaac said, sounding almost embarrassed. "They are not great. Actually, they are pretty terrible. I forgot how much lard to use, and I think I kneaded the dough too long. But I thought you should see that even someone who has been cooking for themselves for years can still make a mess of biscuits." Eliza stared down at the biscuit in her hands, this imperfect offering, and felt tears spill over and run down her cheeks. "Hey," Isaac said softly, alarmed. "I did not mean to make you cry." "You did not," Eliza said, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "I am crying because you are the kindest man I have ever met, and I do not know what I did to deserve you walking into my life." Something shifted in Isaac's expression, something deep and warm and undeniable. "Eliza," he said, and his voice was rough around the edges. "You do not have to deserve kindness. You just have to accept it." She looked up at him. This man who had eaten her burnt pie and her dense bread and her failed experiments in cooking, who had praised every imperfect thing she brought him, who had listened to her and talked with her and made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she was not the failure everyone said she was. "Isaac," she whispered, "I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the cold November air, visible almost as breath fog, and for a terrible moment Eliza thought she had made a horrible mistake, that she had misread everything, that he would step back and tell her she was confused. But he did not step back. Instead, he reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his palms rough and warm against her cold cheeks. "Good," he said, his voice low and fervent. "Because I have been in love with you since the day you showed up on my porch with that burnt pie and apologized for it like you were confessing a crime. I have been in love with you since you sat at my table and tried to convince me your own cooking was terrible. I have been in love with you for weeks, Eliza, and I have been trying to figure out how to tell you." Her breath caught in her throat. "Really, really." He smiled, that wonderful warm smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "You are brave and stubborn and kind, and you work harder than anyone I know. You deserve to be loved exactly as you are, burnt edges and all." Eliza kissed him. She did not plan it, did not think about it, just rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his, and he made a sound of surprise and pleasure and kissed her back, gentle and sure and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "What, marry me?" he repeated, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes. "I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months. But I am sure, Eliza, I am sure about you, about us. Marry me and come live at my farm and bake terrible pies for me for the rest of our lives." "They are not terrible," she said automatically, and he laughed, bright and joyous in the darkness. "See, you are already arguing with me. We will be perfect together." "Isaac, she stopped, thinking of her father and brothers, of the house that had never felt like home, of the endless criticism and the weight of never being enough. And then she thought of Isaac's kitchen, of the warmth and the laughter and the way he looked at her like she was something precious. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, and Eliza felt like she was flying and falling all at once, dizzy with happiness. "When?" she asked when they broke apart. "As soon as possible," Isaac said. "Tomorrow if the preacher will do it." "My father can object all he wants, but you are of age and it is your choice." Isaac's voice was firm. "But I will ask him properly if that is what you want. I will do this right, Eliza." She thought about that, about Isaac facing down her father and Aunt Martha and the rest of them, and felt a fierce surge of love for this man who was willing to stand up for her when no one else ever had. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "Let's tell them tomorrow." They stood together in the cold darkness for a few more minutes, holding each other, and then Eliza slipped back inside to finish the dishes. She worked with a smile on her face, and Isaac's crooked biscuit wrapped carefully in her apron pocket, a talisman against the harsh voices in the parlor. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow came with cold rain and fierce arguments. Eliza's father exploded when Isaac arrived at mid-morning to formally ask for her hand. He ranted about ingratitude and foolishness and girls who did not know their own minds. Aunt Martha chimed in with lectures about hasty decisions and men who were clearly after a free housekeeper. Her brothers said nothing, which was somehow worse than if they had objected outright, but Isaac stood his ground. He stood in the small parlor of the Garrison farmhouse, rain dripping from his hat, and spoke calmly and firmly about his intentions. "I love your daughter, sir," he said to Eliza's father. "I want to marry her and build a life with her. I have a good farm and a steady income from my cattle. I can provide for her, and I will treat her with the respect and kindness she deserves." "Respect and kindness," Eliza's father scoffed. "She needs discipline and direction, not coddling. She is lazy and careless and cannot cook worth a damn. You will regret this in a month." "With respect, sir, you are wrong," Isaac said, and there was an edge to his voice now, a hardness Eliza had never heard before. "Eliza is one of the hardest working people I have ever met. She keeps this house running, manages the cooking and cleaning and mending all on her own, and she does it without complaint even though none of you appreciate it. She is not lazy. She is exhausted, and she is not careless. She is trying her best in a place where her best is never good enough." Aunt Martha drew herself up indignantly. "How dare you speak to your elders that way?" "I dare because someone needs to," Isaac said, turning to face her. "Someone needs to tell you that the way you speak to Eliza is cruel and unfair. She works herself to the bone trying to please people who will never be pleased, and she deserves better than that. She deserves better than all of you." The room fell into shocked silence. Eliza stood frozen near the doorway, her heart in her throat, watching Isaac defend her in a way no one ever had. Her father's face was turning purple with rage. Aunt Martha looked like she had been slapped. Her brothers were staring at Isaac like he had grown a second head. "You have no right," her father started. "I have every right," Isaac interrupted, "because I love her, and because she has agreed to marry me, and because as of tomorrow she will be my wife and under my protection." He looked directly at Eliza's father, his gray eyes hard as flint. "You can give us your blessing or you can withhold it. That is your choice. But either way, I am marrying your daughter, and I am taking her away from this house where no one values her the way they should." Eliza felt tears running down her face, but for once, they were not tears of shame or hurt. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming love for this man who was standing up for her in front of her entire family. "Eliza," her father said, his voice tight with anger, "if you walk out of this house with him, you are no longer my daughter." The words should have hurt. They should have cut deep. But instead, Eliza felt a strange lightness, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "That is your choice, father," she said quietly, "but I am going with Isaac." She crossed the room to stand beside him, and he immediately took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Her father stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he turned away. "Get out of my house." "Gladly," Isaac said. They left together, walking out into the cold November rain, and Eliza did not look back. They were married the next day by the preacher in town, with the preacher's wife and the general store owner serving as witnesses. Eliza wore her best dress, a blue calico that was faded but clean, and Isaac wore a suit he had borrowed from a friend. The ceremony was brief and simple, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Isaac kissed her softly and promised to love her for the rest of their lives. They rode back to his farm, their farm now, in Isaac's wagon, and he carried her over the threshold like she weighed nothing at all. "Welcome home, Mrs. Shaw," he said, setting her down gently in the small kitchen. Mrs. Shaw. Eliza Shaw. The name felt strange and wonderful in her mind. "I like the sound of that," she said. "Good, because you are stuck with it now." Isaac pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Are you all right? About your father, I mean, about everything?" Eliza thought about it, really considered the question. Then she nodded. "I am. I am more than all right, actually. I am free." And she was. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a joyful one. Eliza learned the rhythms of Isaac's farm, the early mornings and the long days, the care of the cattle and the horses. She learned to manage their small household, cooking for 2 instead of 5, and found that the work was lighter when it was appreciated, and Isaac appreciated everything. He praised her coffee every morning. He thanked her for every meal, even the ones that went wrong. When she burned a pot of beans so badly they had to throw the whole thing out, he laughed and told her it happened to everyone, then helped her scrub the pot clean. When she made biscuits that actually turned out light and fluffy, he ate 6 of them and declared it a culinary miracle. Slowly, carefully, Eliza began to believe that maybe she was not hopeless after all. Her cooking improved bit by bit. The bread became less dense. The biscuits became more consistent. She learned to manage the temperamental stove, to judge when the oven was hot enough, to knead dough until it was just right. Isaac encouraged her every step of the way, tasting everything she made and offering gentle suggestions without criticism. "This stew is good," he would say. "Maybe a little more salt next time, but the meat is tender and the vegetables are perfect." Or, "I love this pie crust, it is so flaky. The filling is a touch tart, but that is how I like it anyway." He never made her feel small. He never made her feel stupid. He just made her feel loved. Winter came hard and cold, locking the prairie in snow and ice. They spent long evenings by the fire, Eliza sewing or knitting while Isaac repaired tack or read aloud from the newspaper. Sometimes they just talked about everything and nothing, and Eliza marveled at how easy it was to be with him, how natural it felt to share her thoughts and dreams with this man who listened like every word mattered. On Christmas Eve, she made him a pie apple, his favorite, and this time the crust was golden brown and perfect, the filling sweet and spiced just right. Isaac ate 2 slices and kissed her and told her it was the best pie he had ever tasted. "Better than that first one," she teased. "That first one was perfect too," he said seriously, "because you made it for me. But this one is pretty damn delicious, I will not lie." She laughed and kissed him again, tasting cinnamon and sugar on his lips. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. The snow melted and the prairie turned green, and Eliza planted a garden behind the house, neat rows of vegetables and herbs that she tended with care. She acquired chickens of her own, a small flock that laid eggs reliably and followed her around the yard like feathered dogs. She also started attending the ladies' social gatherings in town, something she had always avoided when she lived with her father. The women of the settlement met once a month to sew and bake and share news, and Eliza had been too ashamed of her cooking to participate. But Isaac encouraged her to go, and so she packed up a basket of biscuits and jam and nervously made her way to the meeting at the schoolhouse. The women welcomed her kindly, and no one said a single critical word about her biscuits. In fact, several of them asked for her jam recipe, and Eliza found herself smiling and talking and feeling like maybe she belonged here after all. One of the women, a cheerful older lady named Mrs. Patterson, pulled her aside as the meeting was ending. "I am so glad you came today, dear," she said warmly. "And I am glad you married that Isaac Shaw. He is a good man and he clearly adores you. I can see it in the way he looks at you at church." Eliza felt her cheeks flush with pleasure. "He is wonderful. And you are good for him too, Mrs. Patterson continued. "He was lonely out there on that farm by himself. You have brought him joy. I can see that too." The words stayed with Eliza long after the meeting ended, warming her from the inside out. She had brought Isaac joy. She, with her burnt pies and her dense bread and her imperfect self, had made someone happy. It was a revelation. Summer came, hot and bright, and with it came a letter from Isaac's sister in Missouri. She was planning a visit in the fall, and she wanted to meet Eliza. "She is going to love you," Isaac assured her when Eliza expressed her nervousness. "Sarah is nothing like your aunt. She is kind and funny, and she does not care if you burn dinner." "How can you be sure?" "Because she burns dinner all the time," Isaac said with a grin. "She once set a pot roast so thoroughly on fire that her husband had to throw it in the yard, and the dog would not even eat it." Eliza laughed despite her nerves. "That makes me feel better." "Good. Now stop worrying and come help me with the horses. That spotted mare is finally letting me get close, and I want you to see." They worked together through the summer, building their life one day at a time. Eliza continued to improve in the kitchen, and her confidence grew along with her skills. She started experimenting with recipes, trying new things, and most of them turned out well. The failures were fewer and farther between, and when they happened, Isaac ate them anyway and told her he loved her for trying. In August, Eliza realized she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening after dinner, nervous and excited and terrified all at once. He stared at her for a moment, his face unreadable, and then he let out a whoop of joy and picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, laughing like a madman. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying over and over like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Eliza said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Isaac set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Eliza, I am the happiest man alive. You have given me everything. A home, a life, a future, and now a child. I love you so much." "I love you too," she whispered. They held each other in the fading summer light, and Eliza thought about the girl she had been a year ago, trembling on a porch with a burnt pie in her hands, convinced she was worthless. And she thought about the woman she was now, loved and cherished and growing a new life inside her. Everything had changed. Everything was perfect. The baby came in late April, a squalling, red-faced boy they named Owen. He had Isaac's gray eyes and Eliza's dark hair, and he was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. Isaac was a devoted father from the start, walking the floors with Owen when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, cooing nonsense at the baby while Eliza recovered from the birth. He looked at his son with such wonder and love that Eliza sometimes found herself crying just watching them together. "You are going to spoil him," she said one afternoon, watching Isaac rock Owen to sleep. "Absolutely I am," Isaac agreed without shame. "He is perfect and he deserves to be spoiled." 2 years later, Mabel was born, a tiny, fierce girl with a set of lungs that could wake the dead. She was all energy and determination from the start, and Eliza knew she was going to be a handful. Isaac adored her instantly. "She is going to be just like you," he told Eliza. "Stubborn and brave and absolutely unstoppable." "God help us all," Eliza said, but she was smiling. And 3 years after that, Levi arrived, a quiet, thoughtful baby who watched everything with solemn eyes and hardly ever cried. He was content to sit in Eliza's lap and observe the world, and Isaac joked that they had finally gotten a calm one to balance out the chaos of the other two. Their house was full of noise and laughter and love. Eliza's cooking had become genuinely good over the years, and she found joy in feeding her family, in watching her children devour her meals and ask for seconds. Isaac still praised everything she made, but now it was deserved, and she no longer needed the reassurance the way she once had. She knew she was good enough now. She had known it for years. The settlement had grown, and Eliza had become known for her baking. She brought pies and cakes to church socials, to barn raisings, to weddings and funerals, and people always asked for her recipes. It was a strange and wonderful feeling to be sought after for her skills instead of criticized for her failures. Her father and aunt never reached out, never wrote, never acknowledged the grandchildren they could have known. It hurt sometimes in quiet moments, but mostly Eliza found she did not care. She had built a family of her own, a family full of love and acceptance, and that was enough, more than enough. In the fall of 1880, the settlement decided to hold a harvest festival, a celebration of another successful year. There would be games and music and dancing, and a baking competition judged by the women's auxiliary. "You should enter," Isaac said when he heard about it. "Your pies are the best in the county." "I do not know," Eliza said, old fears flickering to life. "What if people do not like it? What if—" "Eliza," Isaac took her hands, looking at her seriously. "Do you remember that first pie you made me? The burnt one, of course." "That pie was perfect," he said. "Not because of how it tasted, but because of what it represented. Your courage, your kindness, your willingness to try even when you were terrified, and every pie you have made since then has had that same quality, that same heart." He squeezed her hands gently. "Enter the competition. Not because you need to prove anything to anyone, but because you love baking and you are damn good at it now. Show everyone what I have known since the beginning." Eliza looked at her husband, this man who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself, and felt love swell in her chest so big it almost hurt. "All right," she said. "I will enter." She spent days planning her pie, settling finally on apple, the same kind she had made Isaac that first time. But this one would be different. This one would be perfect. She made the crust from scratch, rolling it out until it was thin and even, crimping the edges with care. She peeled and sliced the apples, tossing them with cinnamon and nutmeg and just a touch of lemon juice. She assembled the pie with steady hands, brushed the top with cream and slid it into the oven, and it came out perfect. golden brown crust, bubbling filling, the smell of cinnamon and butter filling the kitchen. She set it on the windowsill to cool and stepped back, looking at it with satisfaction. Isaac came in from the barn and stopped dead, staring at the pie. "Eliza," he said reverently, "that is a work of art." "It is just a pie." "It is not just a pie." He came over and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "It is proof of how far you have come. I am so proud of you." She turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting dust and sunshine and love. The harvest festival was held on a clear October Saturday, with the whole settlement turning out to celebrate. There were foot races for the children and a shooting competition for the men and a quilting display for the women. The tables were laden with food, and the baking competition entries were set up in a place of honor. A dozen pies of all varieties gleaming in the autumn sun. Eliza's apple pie sat among them, and she tried not to stare at it, tried not to compare it to the others, tried not to let the old fears creep back in. Isaac squeezed her hand. "Stop worrying." "I am not worrying." "You are absolutely worrying. I can see it on your face." He leaned down and kissed her temple. "It is going to be fine. Better than fine." The judges tasted each pie, making notes and conferring in low voices. Eliza watched with her heart in her throat, Owen and Mabel clinging to her skirts and Levy perched on Isaac's shoulders. The waiting was agony. Finally, Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, holding a blue ribbon. "The winner of this year's baking competition," she announced, her voice carrying across the crowd, "is Eliza Shaw for her apple pie." Eliza stared at her, not quite believing what she had heard. "Go on," Isaac said, gently pushing her forward. "Go get your ribbon." She walked up on shaking legs, and Mrs. Patterson handed her the ribbon with a warm smile. "Congratulations, dear. That was the best pie I have ever tasted. You should be very proud." "Thank you," Eliza managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. The crowd applauded, and Eliza turned to see Isaac beaming at her, Levy still on his shoulders and the other two children jumping up and down with excitement. She walked back to them, clutching the blue ribbon in her hand, and Isaac pulled her into a fierce hug. "I knew it," he said into her hair. "I knew you could do it." "I could not have done it without you," Eliza said, pulling back to look at him. "You made me believe I could." "No," Isaac said, shaking his head. "You always had it in you. I just helped you see it." She held out the ribbon to him. "This is yours as much as mine." He took it, looking at it for a moment, then pressed it back into her hands and kissed her, right there in front of the whole settlement. A long, sweet kiss that made the children giggle and the crowd cheer. When they finally broke apart, both of them laughing, Eliza looked around at the festival, at the friends and neighbors who had celebrated with her, at her children dancing around them, at Isaac's proud smile. This was her life now. This was her family, and it was perfect. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Isaac and Eliza sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge over the Kansas prairie. "Do you ever think about that first pie?" Isaac asked. "All the time," Eliza admitted. "I was so terrified bringing it to you. I was sure you would hate it." "I could never have hated it," Isaac said. "It was the best gift anyone had ever given me, not because it was perfect, but because it was yours." Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and hay and home. "I did not know then that I was bringing that pie to the man I would spend the rest of my life with." "I think part of me knew," Isaac said. "The moment I saw you standing there, shaking and apologizing, holding out that burnt pie like it was a confession. I thought, this is a woman who needs someone to see her, really see her, and I wanted to be that person." "You have been," Eliza said softly. "You have been that person every single day since." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands, watching the night deepen around them. Tell me something, Eliza said eventually. Did you really think that first pie tasted good, or were you just being kind? Isaac considered the question seriously. Both, he said finally. It was burnt, yes, but it also tasted like cinnamon and apples and effort. It tasted like someone had tried their best, and that made it good, Eliza, that made it special. She smiled in the darkness. I love you, Isaac Shaw. I love you too, Eliza Shaw, burnt pies and all. They sat together under the Kansas stars, a family built on imperfect offerings and perfect love, and Eliza thought about the blue ribbon still sitting on the kitchen table, the children sleeping peacefully upstairs, the life she had built from nothing but courage and stubborn determination. She had started with a burnt pie and shaking hands. She had ended with everything, and it was more than she ever could have dreamed. The years rolled on, gentle and full. Owen grew tall and serious, helping his father with the cattle and learning to break horses with the same patient skill Isaac had. Mabel was a whirlwind, always into something, always asking questions, keeping Eliza on her toes from dawn until dark. Levy remained quiet and thoughtful, but with a dry sense of humor that could make the whole family laugh when they least expected it. The farm prospered. Isaac expanded the herd and built a new barn. Eliza's garden grew larger every year, and she started selling her preserves and baked goods in town, earning money of her own that she saved carefully in a jar on the top shelf of the pantry. They had hard times, too. A drought one summer that had them hauling water from the creek and praying for rain. A winter so cold the cattle had to be brought into the barn. The year, Owen broke his arm falling from the hayloft and scared them all half to death. The year Mabel got sick with a fever that lasted for days and had Eliza sitting by her bedside, praying harder than she had ever prayed in her life. But they weathered it all together, Isaac and Eliza, leaning on each other when things were hard and celebrating together when they were good. Their love deepened with time, becoming something solid and unshakable, the foundation on which everything else was built. Eliza never heard from her father again. She learned through Mrs. Patterson that he had died 5 years after her wedding, and that her brothers had sold the farm and moved away. She felt a pang of sadness at the news, but it was distant, like grief for a stranger. The family that mattered was here in this house, around this table. In the summer of 1895, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that brought half the settlement to their farm. There was music and dancing and food enough to feed an army. Eliza's pies were the centerpiece of the dessert table, 6 different kinds, and they were all gone by the end of the night. Owen was 19 now, courting a sweet girl named Anna from a neighboring farm. Mabel was 17, independent and fierce, with no interest in courting anyone yet much to the relief of her father. Levy was 14, still quiet but coming into his own with a talent for fixing anything mechanical. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Eliza and Isaac stood together in the yard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. 20 years, Eliza said wonderingly. It feels like no time at all and also like forever. Forever in the best way, Isaac said, pulling her close. I would do it all again, Eliza, every moment, even the burnt pie, especially the burnt pie. He kissed the top of her head. That pie brought you to me. It was the beginning of everything. Eliza wrapped her arms around him, holding tight, feeling the solid warmth of him and the steady beat of his heart. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of love, 3 children and a farm and a life built from courage and kindness. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me. For believing in me. For loving me when I could not love myself. Always, Isaac said simply. Always, Eliza. They stood together as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, and Eliza thought about that frightened girl she had been, standing on a porch with a burnt pie and shaking hands. That girl had been brave enough to try, and that bravery had changed everything. The story could have ended there, with sunset and stars and two people who had found their forever in each other. But life does not end with anniversaries, and love is not a single perfect moment, but 1,000 imperfect ones strung together like beads on a thread. So the years continued, and the Shaw family continued with them. Owen married his Anna in a lovely ceremony at the church in town, and they built a house on the far edge of the Shaw property. Within 2 years, they had given Eliza and Isaac their first grandchild, a baby girl with Anna's blonde hair and Owen's serious eyes. Eliza held that baby and cried, overwhelmed by the miracle of new life and the realization that she was a grandmother now, that the scared girl with the burnt pie had become a matriarch. Mabel eventually fell in love with a rancher's son from 3 counties over, a young man who was not intimidated by her fierce spirit, but rather admired it. They married and moved to his family's ranch, and Eliza missed her daughter terribly, but was proud of the strong, confident woman she had become. Levy surprised everyone by deciding to become a veterinarian, studying with the doctor in town, and then going away to agricultural college. He came back with a degree and a quiet confidence, setting up a practice that served all the farms and ranches in the area. He married late, at 30, to a school teacher who loved books as much as he did. Isaac and Eliza grew older together, their hair turning gray, their hands gnarled with work and age, but their love never dimmed. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. Isaac still praised every meal Eliza made, though now it was habit more than necessity, a ritual of appreciation that had lasted decades. And every year on the anniversary of that first pie, Eliza made Isaac an apple pie. Sometimes it was perfect, golden and beautiful. Sometimes it was a little burnt around the edges, on purpose now, a callback to that beginning. And every year, Isaac ate every bite and told her it was the best pie he had ever tasted. In the spring of 1910, Eliza stood in her kitchen on a warm May morning, making yet another pie. She was 62 years old now, her hair completely gray, her hands spotted with age. But they were steady as she rolled out the crust, as steady as they had been unsteady that first time 40 years ago. Isaac came in from the barn, moving slower than he once had, but still strong, still solid. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, exactly as he had done 1,000 times before. Making a pie, he asked, though he could clearly see that she was. For the church social tomorrow, Eliza said. Mrs. Patterson requested my apple pie specifically. Of course she did. Everyone knows your pies are the best. Eliza turned in his arms, flour dusting her apron and her cheeks. Do you remember the first pie I made you? Every detail, Isaac said. You were shaking so hard I thought you might drop it, and you apologized about 50 times before I even tasted it. It was terrible. It was perfect, Isaac corrected, just as he always did. It brought you into my life. How could it be anything but perfect? Eliza reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines time had carved there, the weathering of 40 years of Kansas sun and wind. I love you, Isaac Shaw, more than I can say. I love you too, he said, leaning down to kiss her, soft and sweet and familiar. More than burnt pies, more than golden ones, more than anything in this world. They held each other in the warm May sunshine streaming through the kitchen window, two people who had built a life from courage and acceptance and imperfect offerings. Outside, their grandchildren played in the yard. Inside, a pie baked in the oven, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon and home. And Eliza, who had once believed she was not good enough, who had trembled and apologized and tried so hard to be perfect, finally understood the truth that Isaac had known from the beginning. Love was not about perfection. Love was about showing up with your burnt offerings and your shaking hands and your imperfect self, and finding someone who would take what you offered and cherish it anyway. Love was Isaac eating every bite of that first pie and meaning it when he said it was good. Love was 40 years of steady encouragement and gentle acceptance. Love was building a family and a life and a legacy, one small imperfect moment at a time. The timer rang, and Eliza pulled away to check the pie. It came out perfect, as her pies usually did now, golden brown and bubbling with sweet filling. Isaac looked at it and smiled. "Beautiful," he said, "just like the woman who made it." And Eliza, surrounded by the life she had built and the love she had found, smiled back and knew that she was, finally and forever, enough. That evening, after dinner and dishes and all the small rituals of their daily life, Isaac and Eliza walked out to the small family cemetery on the hill behind their house. It was a peaceful spot, shaded by cottonwood trees, where they had buried Isaac's parents years ago when they had moved the family plots from Missouri. They sat on the bench Isaac had built there, looking out over the farm spread below them, the fields green with spring growth, the cattle grazing peacefully, the house where their children had grown and their grandchildren now played. "This is a good life," Isaac said quietly. "The best life," Eliza agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the Kansas sky in shades of fire and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song. The wind rustled through the new grass, carrying the scent of growing things and the promise of summer. "Isaac," Eliza said after a while, "yes, thank you for eating that pie." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw everything they had been and everything they had become. "Thank you for making it," he said. "Thank you for being brave enough to bring it to me. Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for loving me all these years." "Always," Eliza said, echoing his promise from 2 decades ago. "Always, Isaac." They held hands as the stars came out one by one. 2 people who had found each other across a burnt pie and a prayer, who had chosen each other every day since, who had built something beautiful from imperfect ingredients and perfect love. And when they finally rose to walk back to the house, back to the warm light spilling from the windows and the sound of their grandchildren's laughter, they walked together, side by side, the way they had done for 40 years and would do for all the years remaining. Because that is what love is in the end, not grand gestures or perfect moments, just showing up day after day with your burnt offerings and your shaking hands and your imperfect self, and finding someone who will eat every bite and call it good. Someone who will stand up for you when no one else will. Someone who will believe in you until you learn to believe in yourself. Someone who will build a life with you, one small imperfect moment at a time. That is what Eliza found in Isaac Shaw on a hot September day in 1871, when she stood on his porch with a burnt pie and a trembling voice. And that is what she held on to for the rest of her life, through joy and sorrow, through triumph and failure, through all the beautiful imperfect moments that make up a marriage, a family, a life. She held on to love, and love held her right back, steady and true and forever. The end came gently for both of them, as these things sometimes do for couples who have loved deeply and well. Isaac passed first, in his sleep on a cold winter night in 1918, with Eliza holding his hand. He was 78 years old, and he had lived a full, good life. Eliza followed him 2 years later, quietly slipping away in the house they had shared for nearly 50 years. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, and her last words were about the pie, about that first offering that had changed everything. "Tell him I made him a pie," she whispered to Owen, who sat by her bedside. "Tell him I am bringing it to him now, and this time it is perfect." They buried her next to Isaac on the hill, under the cottonwood trees, and on her gravestone they carved her name and her dates, and one line that said everything that needed to be said. She was brave enough to try. And in the farmhouse kitchen, hanging on the wall in a simple frame, was a faded blue ribbon from a harvest festival in 1880, a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had achieved. But more than that, it was a reminder of the truth Isaac had taught her, the truth she had carried with her every day for 50 years. You do not have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to be brave enough to show up with what you have and offer it with an open heart. The rest will follow. The burnt edges, the imperfections, the fears and the failures, they are all part of the recipe. They are what make us human, and they are what make love real. Years later, when Eliza and Isaac's great-great-grandchildren would ask about their ancestors, about the stern-faced couple in the old photograph hanging in the hallway, someone would always tell the story of the burnt pie. They would tell how a scared young woman walked across a Kansas field with a terrible pie and a trembling voice, and how the man who answered the door ate every bite and fell in love with her courage. They would tell how that man stood up for her when no one else would, how he believed in her until she believed in herself, how he built a life with her that spanned 50 years and 3 children and countless grandchildren. They would tell how she went from a girl who could not bake to a woman whose pies won competitions, how she went from someone who apologized for existing to someone who knew her own worth. And they would end the story the way all good love stories end. Not with "they lived happily ever after," because life is never that simple, but with "they loved each other every day through everything, and that was enough." Because in the end, that is all any of us can hope for, to find someone who will eat our burnt offerings and call them good. To find someone who will see us, really see us, and love what they find. To find someone who will stand beside us when we are trying our hardest and falling short, and tell us that trying is enough. Eliza found that in Isaac, and Isaac found that in Eliza. And together, they built something that lasted long after they were gone. A family, a legacy, a love story that began with a burnt pie and ended with a life well lived. That is the story their descendants told. And that is the story that mattered, not the burnt edges or the imperfect crust. But the courage it took to offer them anyway, and the love that saw past them to the heart underneath. That is what endures. That is what lasts. That is what makes a life worth living and a story worth telling, one burnt pie at a time.